Welcome to How to Yugioh.
Breakdown. Endboard versus engine. Alright guys, I want to say thank you. I've hit 200 subscribers. Man, that's something I didn't really see happening on my channel, not gonna lie. Considering this channel is quite a boring channel, which is just a channel that I created mainly for just teaching Yu-Gi-Oh mostly. While yes, there are discussions from time to time, but majority of it is to just teach Yu-Gi-Oh. So I really did think it would cap out at 100 and I would stop the growth. So I'm very glad for the growth that I'm having here. Very, very pleased. Anyways, with that being said, I'll get on with the rest of this video where I'll talk about, the end board and the engine and give my overall thoughts and feelings with how Yu-Gi-Oh is at the moment and how I think this discussion should be. With that being said, let's get on with the rest of the video. Okay, so in front of you, you can see 3 XYZ monsters. And in the upcoming format, we're going to have the best deck is looking to be Yugioh. And their typical board may see a board like this, with a Rafflesia, an Abyss Dweller, and a Tornado Dragon. Nothing too crazy or nothing too scary. Again, there's something that I've been told by when I was having a discussion with some of the people at my locals, was that Yugioh was just going to be absolute dominant force in the TCG, that it was going to be crazy and we were just going to be just dominated by it. It was going to be absolutely broken. But then I want to ask you a question. Do these 3 XYZs on the board, do they look broken to you in any shape or form?
No!
Does this end board signify, the board is absolutely crazy? And I would say it doesn't. If we go to the next slide, you can see that the board here with Unchained, we can see much more things that can facilitate being broken. But anyways, let's go back to the previous slide with these 3 XYZs. And this is something that I would like to talk about, and I think we have been spoiled by one-card combos. And we are looking at them and seeing that every deck that does a one-card combo is absolutely broken. But what people fail to understand, and what Yu-Gi-Oh players fail to understand, is that the end board matters. If the end board that you're making is absolutely abysmal, then to me, that is not a broken board. Sure, Yugioh is extremely consistent.
Did someone say perfect consistency?
But there's a difference between a Yugioh board and a Tempai board.
Facts.
What do I mean by this? Sure, Tempai makes even a board that is less than Yugioh, and it dominates, and it's feared by the community right now in both TCG and OCG. Why is Tempai feared? First of all, it is because of their field spell. The Tempai field spell essentially states that once on the field, you cannot interact with them. This is a huge significance, and this is one of the reasons why in the latest ban list, the Sangan summoning went to 1. This is a very important fact to take note of here. And the fact is that they specialize in the battle phase. And in the battle phase in Yu-Gi-Oh, a lot of 99% of hand traps, nearly 100% cannot work in the battle phase, right?
The truth you need to know.
In the battle phase, only stat manipulation and the damage step rules apply. Which means that Tempai is practically unbeatable in the phase that it specializes in.
You don't get to play, you just lose.
Now, when we look at Yugioh, right? Yugioh, the end board here only makes these 3 cards. Possibly you'll make a Yugioh card that pops a card. Another thing is that, yes, while Yugioh do have a field spell, however, you need to be able to make an XYZ monster to get that generic negate. And only that negate, however, is only taken consideration for monster effects. It doesn't mean so if your opponent has a ghost ogre, has a way to destroy set, field spell of Yugioh, then they can still interact. Remember, the opponent still is able to interact with the Yugioh player. The difference between Sangan summoning and the Yugioh field spell, the Yugioh field spell only stops monster effects. And it only stops monster effects if the Yugioh player controls an XYZ as you detach an XYZ material. There's a lot of things that you need to take into account here. So with that, all these factors in mind, I can therefore say that the end board of a Yugioh player isn't that impressive compared to the other boards we've had stating out this year. And yes, just because the opponent has loads of hand traps in their deck, just because the deck can play a lot of hand traps, the play style of a deck, in my opinion, and the specializations that the deck has determines its strength. You look at Yugioh, and the only good thing, it doesn't really have a good thing going for it. Sure, we have a field spell that allows it to have a monster negate, but you only get that monster negate if you have an XYZ monster. There's a load of conditions. Another thing people will say is that, the end board is great because we've got the Malchami cards, which means that we can't be making too many summons from the extra deck. But that is a topic for another time as we get to the next part of this video, and I'll talk about more about that. Look in front of you and you can see two XYZ monsters. Now, I'm going to talk about a topic here that I think us in the community, we don't fully understand. Mind you, this is my own opinion, but I think this is again due to the nature of us being spoiled by generic negates. And now that we're living in a format in TCG where generic negates are not possible, we're just looking at every card that negates and treating them as broken. But I want to make a distinction between these two cards. First of all, we have Traptrix Rafflesia and we have Varudras, the final bringer of the end times. So, we look at this and you ask yourselves, what is the difference, right? The difference is with Varudras, you can get that negate immediately. As soon as this card is summoned, you can negate a monster effect. It's boom, generic negate, boom, bada bing, bada boom, it's done.
That sounds oddly familiar.
Whereas with Traptrix Rafflesia, you have to send a whole card. There is a cost here.
Restriction is stronger than prevention.
That makes a significant difference, right? And I know many have said, and I think I've had this discussion again, and there's this debate that Traptrix Rafflesia is just as bad as a cards like Varudras, Appaloosa, Baron, Savage, and the like. But I say absolutely not. Why is that? Let's go to the next slide and you get to see a general idea of what I'm talking about. If we look at Traptrix Rafflesia, these are the amount of choices that you have to choose. Traptrix Rafflesia, sure, is a monster negate, but you've got to choose the correct hole to play in your trap. Let's say you're playing it in, say for example, in the Yugioh deck. And yes, it has been stated that the Yugioh have a hole trap, technically, because it says hole in it, but I think, given time and as it goes by, I think it won't be treated as whole. But let's say, for argument's sake, it is treated, that Yugioh trap is treated as a whole trap. First of all, it means that you're going to, most often than likely, going to play that Yugioh hole trap and the Gravedigger's trap hole. This means you have two cards, two bricks in your deck. And unlike the Baron or Varudras here, where you can just make from the extra deck and get an Omni Negate immediately, with Traptrix Rafflesia, you do not. And the other thing as well, Traptrix Rafflesia doesn't necessarily give you a monster negate. It only gives you a monster negate in the hand with Gravedigger's Trap Hole. You have to decide which trap you need and which negate to give Traptrix Rafflesia. Another thing as well is, as you can see here from the screen, these are loads of applications that Rafflesia can be used for. And the more holes you put in your deck, the higher likelihood you are to brick. This isn't like a Baron here where we can just put multiple Barons and we can have multiple negates and we can have just endless amounts of just negation and make a big multi-negate board. It doesn't work like that with Rafflesia. The more holes you put in your deck, the higher likelihood that you are going to brick, and your deck isn't going to be as consistent. Trust me, I know this, as I showed you a deck profile before with Ragnarika. Sure, some of those hole traps are in the side, and sure, as I put in that deck profile, that it's pretty great. And yes, there does come a time when you can deal with Nibiru. But here's the thing, and I think this is something, again, that players are failing to realize. Before, we were using generic negates to deal with the hand traps. One of the reasons why generic negates was so good is that we could use them with Wanted Abandon, and they had no cost. So whenever we used them, there was always 100% success rate that you would be able to negate hand traps. However, with a card like Rafflesia, that is not the case. Sure, Rafflesia and Varudras are used for the same purpose. The difference is a Rafflesia has more decision trees and the likelihood of you drawing bricks are high. The amount of games where I drew the Gravedigger's Trap Hole when I didn't need to draw it, meaning that when I went first, I couldn't stop an opponent's hand trap, especially when I made Rafflesia on the board, is extremely high, even with perfect deck building and perfect ratios. There are just going to be games where you're just not going to have ways to deal with your opponent's hand traps, right? Especially with Rafflesia on the board. This is something that needs to be stated here. So let's go to the previous slide with Rafflesia and Varudras. This is something that needs to be stated. Negates with cost on them, like Rafflesia, are healthy for Yugioh and are not a problem. This is something that needs to be understood by the majority of the player base, and I think we don't understand it because we have seen. Because the negates that have been dominating the competitive scene have been negates that have no cost with them, we now assume that every negate that is put on the board, right, that deals with something is a negative thing for Yugioh and is a complete and absolutely no-brainer. And I say no. There is nothing wrong with Rafflesia in Yugioh. It is absolutely healthy and it is fine. Because it forces decision making, right? When you put a Rafflesia in your deck, there are chances that you will brick. And the more you invest in Rafflesia, the higher likelihood you're going to brick even more. Even if we put the hypothetical that the whole Ryziel trap is there and the Gravedigger is there, that means you give your deck a higher likelihood of bricking as those cards can make your deck brick even more. And with the fact that with the Ryziel deck, you'll need a field spell and you need to make an XYZ monster, that means your deck's got to be specialized in making rank 4s. And sure, we can say, but yeah, it's gonna be pretty easy, right? We can make some rank 4s. But here's the thing. Making rank 4s may be easy, but when you're making a deck that is super consistent, and this is something I want to say about one-card combo decks. The reason why one-card combo decks in the TCG over this past year have succeeded and have been an absolute dominant force is that the generic negations that they did have, right, had no cost to them. Meaning that you could just simply make them. They didn't have any cost. You could make them all the time, every time, and you were not punished. You didn't really need to think. Like, when you had a card like Baron, did you really need to think about the decision trees that Baron would give you? Absolutely not. Because there was no cost. There was no downside. So that's all I've got to say for this part, and I will elaborate on this point with the next slide. And as you can see in front of you, you can see Silhouette Rabbit and the Varudras once again. You can see with Silhouette Rabbit, you're going to need to play a continuous trap. And just like, if we go into the next slide, just like the Trap Tricks Rafflesia, there's loads of decision trees you need to make. What is the best continuous trap you're going to play with it to maximize the effect of Silhouette Rabbit? Is Silhouette Trick the best one? Is Azaroon the best? Is Kuibeko the best? Or is Prey of the Jiraigumo the best? Let's go back to the previous slide. What is the best card for you? Now, this is something, again, I want to state and I want to repeat myself, is negations with cost are fine. Negations that aren't free are healthy. And this is a concept that I think we need to get used to going forward, especially for us in the TCG. Let us not be spoiled by the generic negates. We've had generic negates and we've had tier 0 decks dominating our game for so long that we've failed to realize balance when we see it. When we see a balanced negate, we actually think it's broken when it isn't. You don't see anyone here complaining about Silhouette Rabbit, do you, in the TCG? Absolutely not, because it has a cost to it. Sure, it can do a lot, but it is perfectly healthy, and not broken at all. Same thing with Rafflesia here. You've seen the decision trees that you've got to make with Silhouette Rabbit. Now, so you ask me again, what is the point that I'm trying to make here? What is he saying? Well, what I'm saying is that negates with cost with them are absolutely healthy in Yu-Gi-Oh! And another thing I want to reiterate is that we've been dominated for the whole part of 2024 with one-card combos, okay? These one-card combos have had perfect consistency. And because they've had perfect consistency, they've been able to dominate the competitive scene for so long. And we shall assume, with the way Konami is going, that one-card combos are the way of the future. Why is this relevant? This is relevant because of the generic negates that we have now. When you have negates that cause you bricks, I'm telling you, you are going to feel it, especially when you play a deck that has perfect consistency. A deck like Yugioh isn't going to like a card like Rafflesia. For the most part, Rafflesia has perfect consistency. Okay? No, not Rafflesia, but Yugioh has perfect consistency with the way the effects are routed. Card like Rafflesia isn't going to do much wonders for Yugioh at all. You'll find that it'll just end up being better by playing other cards. In fact, the Twin Eclipse card that comes out in Supreme Darkness is a much better card for Yugioh than Rafflesia ever is, and does much more. The whole trap, again, you'll find is much better for Yugioh than Rafflesia. This is the thing with generic negates that have costs to them. When we have a blueprint of making decks that are super consistent, players, especially in the TCG or OCG, you'll find are not going to play those negates that have cost to them and are going to rather play cards that offer more value, more extension purposes, and will play those cards instead. And so you thinking that these cards that like Rafflesia and whatever are going to be absolutely busted or broken is a complete misdemeanor and no-no of how you underestimate the card design of where Yu-Gi-Oh! Is at the moment. Do I see Rafflesia in the future getting banned? Hell no. Who the hell is going to be making a deck that revolves around Rafflesia? Look at Trap Tricks in the OCG and TCG. Where is this deck? absolutely nowhere. It's absolutely trash in the competitive scene, and it is absolutely garbage in the rogue scene. And you're trying to tell me that Rafflesia is a card to be scared of? Get out of here. I'm gonna slap you silly upside the head. So, no. And I think that's all I've got to say, so let's go into the conclusion. And here we have it, the overall conclusion. So what do I want to say at the end of this video? What I do want to say is that when it comes to end boards, in my personal opinion, and I think in the opinion that I think that should matter, again, this is fully skewed in my opinion, end boards do matter. An end board that is lacking, that doesn't have negates, is a perfectly healthy end board. Again, let us give Branded as an example. Branded is a deck that's been in Yu-Gi-Oh for quite a long time now, and before it had that card Albion, the Sanctifier Dragon, it's been an absolutely healthy deck. It only had one card, which was Mirror J, that just banished a card. There was no negates in the deck. And sure, many players in TCG and OCG haven't complained about this deck. It didn't do anything crazy. Sure, the deck added loads of value, but the playstyle of the deck and the way the deck played wasn't something that we can sit here and say it's unfair. The only reason why the deck became unfair and why we are complaining about it recently is because they got a card like Sanctifier that allowed you to then special summon some floodgates. But leaving the questionable card aside, that is Sanctifier, right? Everything else in Branded is fine. Another point that I want to make, let's look at a deck like White Forest. White Forest is one of the best examples, I can say, of a deck that is absolutely fair. It lost, in the TCG especially, it lost its generic negate when Baron was banned. So Baron was banned and then it was released. You look at White Forest and it is stuck in Rogue tier in the TCG. In fact, it is even lower. And with the latest standings, especially with Fiolos coming out, Centurion beat it. Let's just let that sink for a moment. That Centurion is the best deck at the moment, and it should have been White Forest, because White Forest does a lot more things. But you come to see the conclusion here. So why is it that Centurion has beaten White Forest? The reason being is that Centurion makes a stronger end board. It's one of the only decks, apart from, White Forest, that can put a negate down there. Sure, the negate isn't as oppressive, but it can do some kind of lock there, some kind of special things with the negates. We can see here, and from what I say, that the end board in Yu-Gi-Oh does matter. Look at 2024 with the end boards that we've had in Yu-Gi-Oh. Look at the fact that the stronger the end board, the harder it is to break that board. You compare end boards with Azamina, Fiendsmith, Snake Eye, Ubel, and the like, and all these decks that we've had in 2024, the common theme to all of them is their end boards are absolutely crazy and unbeatable. One of the reasons why they've been unbeatable is because of those generic negates. Remove those generic negates from them, and all of a sudden, the deck's power level drops, and it is much easier to deal with. Loads of players in the TCG now are liking the format. Why is that? Because loads of very powerful decks have lost their fangs. Snake Eye doesn't have the generic negates anymore. And sure, many can say that Rhea Silvera is a generic negate that we have. But here's the difference, right? Engine is different from a negate. And this is something that I want to make perfectly clear. I have no issues with engines. I do have issues with generic negates. And you may ask yourself, Why am I putting this in conclusion and why am I making this distinction? Because engines in Yu-Gi-Oh! Do have a cost in them. If you're going to play the Fiendsmith package, then guess what? That is the only thing that you're going to be able to play. You can't just mix the Fiendsmith package with the Azamina package and the Snake Eye package. It doesn't work like that. Engines are restricted, right? You have a choice. You can either have one engine or another. You can't have both. And when you try to have both, when you try to have a Snake Eye package and a Fiendsmith package together, then that is the only thing that you can actually play. Notice how there's a lack of variation in your deck building and the lack of choices that you have when you make this choice. Sure, with Memento, you can play it with Fiendsmith. But guess what? That's the only engine you can put in it. And you can't put any more. Let's say you want to play the Rescue Ace and you can put the Snake Eye package. Well, guess what? That's the only engine you can put in it. You can't put any more because your extra deck is limited. Do you see where I'm going with this? Engines are something in Yu-Gi-Oh! Which, in my eyes anyway, are absolutely fine because the cost is the engine itself. You can't play multiple engines. And when you do try to play multiple engines, it doesn't work. You have to choose. So, let's wrap it up, and this is what I've got to say as I approach the end of this video. Endboards in Yu-Gi-Oh! Matter, I do feel, and the weaker the end board, the healthier the deck. This is something that we've proven time and time again in TCG. In fact, this year has proved that philosophy. Decks that have had absolutely weak end boards have been healthy for the game and have allowed diversification of our meta scene. Look at the competitive scene right now, right? And can you honestly tell me any deck that puts a negation style board? Absolutely not. Sure, many of us can argue that, yeah, the Mulchami cards are in there. I would say absolute bull crap. Sure, we have the Mulchami cards, but you can still play the Snake Eye Fire King. Why is no one playing that? So, again, it's about the power of these end boards. The end boards is significantly weaker. If you're going to make rank, if you're going to make Snake Eye Fire King, you're going to have to rely on rank 8. If you're going to make this style of board, you're going to have to rely on this, that, and the other. And that's where this discussion comes to a close. And that's where I wrap it up by saying Yu-Gi-Oh! Is in a great place, in my opinion. We are going to be getting into a better place next year, and we're going to be starting with a fresh, clean slate. And this debate of whether the engine is good, whether generic negates are broken, I think needs to come to a close, and we need to realize that generic negates with costs are fair. But generic negates without costs are broken. And that engines overall are, in my opinion, fair. Yes, some engines in Yu-Gi-Oh! Do have an absolute cost that can do absolute crazy things and make your deck do absolutely nonsensical things, but the engine itself is the cost. And that is something we as players need to understand, that you can't play multiple engines. And that's the end of this video. Tune in next time as we'll talk about different things and a different topic. Hope to see you soon.
We come to the end of this video. So, as I like to say, you are one step closer to becoming a Yu-Gi-Oh! Master. My fate, right, is in your hands.